Miss DM with us, and I am the publisher of Lurid Editions. So I'm going to be talking to you about republishing The Milkman's on His Way, gay young adult classic. So The Milkman's on His Way has just been republished by Lurid Editions. And it was first published by the Gay Men's Press in 1982. It is written by the award-winning children's author David Rees, who I'm going to talk about in a minute. And it's one of the first young adult novels published in the UK to proudly centre gay characters. It was debated in Parliament and suppressed under Section 28, and it's been out of print since the 1990s. And Ian McKellen, who I hope feels better soon after he had an accident recently, has described it for us as a gay classic. So who was David Rees? He was born in 1936 in Surbiton, and he died in 1993. He was the author of over 30 works between 1975 and 1993. He is best known as an author for children's and young adults fiction. His 1978 novel, The Exeter Blitz, won the Carnegie Medal, which is an award, of course, in recognition of children's writing. He also wrote journalism for Gay News and Gay Times. He was a lecturer in education at the University of Exeter, which informed his interest in young adult literature. He's best known for children and young adults fiction, although later work was written for the adult market, and his autobiography, Not For Your Hands, was published in 1992. The Wrong Apple, which was published in 1987, is about a character who was coming to terms with their HIV diagnosis. So David Rees published some of the first young adult novels which feature gay characters. Quentin's Man and In the Tent were published in 1976 and 1979, respectively. In the Tent is quite interesting because it has a dual narrative. Part of it is set on a camping expedition in the Lake District with four boys go off and camp in a tent, and there's a terrible storm and they're stuck in the Lake District. So they have to figure out what it's being together and figure out all sorts of things. But then there's also a historical fantasy aspect to the novel as well, where it's set during the English Civil War, where one of the characters retreats into that space so that he can cope with his gay desire for his friends. Quentin's Man and In the Tent were both published by Dennis Dobson, who are an interesting left-wing eccentric publisher that was publishing active in the post-war period. Later works by David Rees that were published by Gay Men's Press include The Hunger, which was set during the Irish famine and is about the relationship between an Irish farmhand and his English tenant. David Rees talked about the censorship that he experienced as a gay young adult author, particularly with regard to the depiction of sex and sexuality. And this was a problem, particularly in libraries. And he said, in England, the problems have been in libraries. I know cases where books and minor schools have been made available to sixth formers only, but he was very anxious that there should be novels published on young adult lists that can reach the gay teenager to reassure him that he is not a freak, not alone, and that homosexuals could have just as many chances of achieving happiness and fulfillment as anyone else. And that was a really good part of, I suppose, David Rees's activism, that he was using young adult literature as a social educational tool, or he was attempting to. The Milkman's on His Way is probably the fullest realization of David Rees's desire to centre gay characters in young adult novels. It's a coming of age story focused on the trials and tribulations of teenager Ewan McCrae, who lives in Bude in Cornwall, as he's coming to terms with his sexuality in the early 1980s, and eventually deciding that he must move to London to realise his identity and discover gay community. It was published by the Gay Men's Press, the radical publisher that was active for 20 years between 1980 and the year 2000, and founded by Aubrey Walter and David Fernbach. The Gay Men's Press published nearly 300 titles, ranging across a range of different genres, including fiction, memoir, art photography, scene guides, and so on. If you're interested in knowing more about the Gay Men's Press, they do have a website that was set up by the founders called, I think it's GMP. But if you just Google Gay Men's Press, you'll find it. The logo is rather lovely, and I like it in this radioactive version, stenciled, very handmade, giving you the sense of gay people taking the means of production into their own hands. So this quote is from an application for financial assistance made by the Gay Men's Press in 1983 to the Greater London Council. And like many organisations based in London in the early 1980s, they made applications to support their activities. And this particular application was to support editorial work. And in their narrative, their funding narrative, they say our books are directed in the first place to fellow gays. And they also highlight the socially important aspects of publishing. So reading is generally a private activity, and many lonely people can receive help from books while they are still too insecure to visit a gay pub or community centre. So the Milkman's on his way takes his inspiration. The cover takes its inspiration of a key scene in the novel where Ewan encounters his first great love, his first sexual encounter on the beach in Bude with Paul, who is a recently qualified teacher who is on holiday in Cornwall with his friends. And that's a key issue that is explored, a key tension that is explored in the novel is the legality of gay relationships, particularly given that the age of consent is at that time in the early 1980s, 21. And it's an issue that is explored throughout the novel, as I will go on to talk about at the end of the presentation. So The Milk Was on His Way was very popular among gay readers when it hit the shelves in the early 1980s. It topped the charts, compiled by Gay's the Word, of the bestseller list in May 1982. It was well received among the educational press, so educationalists, teachers, librarians all celebrated it as a dramatic breakthrough in the genre, given its centering of gay characters. And they also highlighted the importance of empathetic representation, particularly between homosexual and heterosexual characters. In the last scene, there was the touching last scene between Leslie's girlfriend and Ewan, which underlines this newfound empathy. And this was definitely something that David Rees wanted to foreground and cultivate in the novel and through his writing, of building affiliation and empathy between homosexual and heterosexual teenagers. While the book was well received in the early 1980s when it was first published, later on in the decade, the temperature of reception began to shift as the impact of the AIDS crisis really began to be felt within the gay community. So the book was reissued in 1986 and was actually received as being socially irresponsible and naff because of its advocacy, quote, of carefree casual sex, which verges on the irresponsible. And one of the interesting things about republishing books from the past and resituating them in the present is that they are kind of often marked by a very distinct historicity. So The Milk Was on His Way was published in 1982, and it was written and edited before that. So it was written really on the precipice of a dramatic change in gay life in Britain in the early 1980s. So you've had this period of increasing progression and optimism with the decriminalisation of homosexuality and the advances for the Commission for Homosexual Equality and so forth. And then in the 1980s, the AIDS crisis takes effect, and it really, devastates the gay community. But The Milkman's on His Way is interesting because it doesn't have any of that sense of disaster. It's very much imprinted by the hope and optimism of those times. So it's really a bit of a time capsule. It offers a window into imagining what could have been had the AIDS crisis not hit. And along with shifting reception within the gay press, the book was also became the object of unwanted attention among the right-wing media. So this is a newspaper headline from the Journal in October the 31st, 1986, which was a North London local newspaper that reports on a new gay sex book scandal. And it tells the story of a 15-year-old girl who'd acquired the book, was on his way from her school library, took it home, and of course her parents discovered it in her satchel, and there was uproar. And the book includes scenes of sodomy and masturbation between the young schoolboy and the 23-year-old school teacher, the newspaper reported. The teacher introduces the boy, aged 16, to gay sex after he confesses to being confused about his sexuality. And there are detailed descriptions of love scenes on a beach in Cornwall where the boy met the teacher. So this is really the crux of it. I think the book was shocking because it depicted sex, gay sex, and had a very pedagogical approach to gay sex. So it was telling young people how to have anal sex, and that it might hurt at start, but then paying gave way to pleasure and so forth. So it was quite graphic in that sense. But I think the social aspects of it was that it was depicting illegal relationships at the time, and that was more fuel to the fire of censorship and hysteria that started to gravitate around the book. The book, it was debated in the House of Lords, and Lady Cox, in a debate, described it as pornographic. It was also debated in the House of Commons when Colin Moynihan was asked, the Minister of Arts, if he had read the book and whether he would make a statement about his policy with regard to the availability of the Milkman in public libraries. Richard Luce said, "I have seen the book, and in my view, it is not suitable to be stocked in a children's library." And this was followed up by actions from the Inner London Education Authority themselves. So David Mallon, Director of Education of Schools, wrote to school teachers in the Inner London Education Authority. Both the Chief Inspector and I have now read this book, and there are some descriptions of sexual acts which in our view are indeed voyeuristic and over explicit. Neither of us considers the book suitable for a school library, and may I ask that you determine whether or not it is in your school library stock, and if it is, to consider, in light of this advice, whether it should remain so. There was pushback against the removal of the Milkman's on his way from school libraries, from unions. Unions were did write to members of schools and colleges to say that if you are instructed to withdraw the book or any other resource presenting equal opportunity issues in a positive manner, you have union backing to refuse removing them from the shelves. But ultimately, these acts of censorship and suppression that took place did have an impact on the availability of the Milkman in school libraries and in bookshops. So just to close, I'm just going to go back to this issue about legality, the legality of gay sex in the book, and how this was a key topic explored by David Rees. It's something that comes up again and again. He's pushing back against it. So as mentioned, Paul, Ewan's first true love, was a school teacher, newly qualified. And this is a conversation between Ewan's mum and Ewan saying, "This Paul, he should be behind bars, teaching children in a school." So invoking the spectre of the law. And when Ewan comes back to Bude to stay for a weekend with his parents, his mum asked him if he's in any trouble. And Ewan is puzzled about this at first. And he says, "Well, what trouble should I be in?" I don't know, Ewan, but is there anything you feel you should tell us about? The law, for instance? The law, for a moment, I was baffled. Then I understood. No sex before 21. A more idiotic, cruel law, in my opinion, would be hard to imagine. A boy and a girl were legal at 16. Why not people like me? I told you already, I said. I'm a month's holiday. I've come down for a few days. That's all. And this is Ewan reflecting on his own personal experiences and life trajectories. It was as if some God had said, these shall not grow up, these shall not be adults. The crippling financial dependence on parents, another way of preventing growth. And that third barrier, the world of straight people, the law that said, homosexual, thou shalt not touch another, thou shalt not learn to love, at least not to the magic age of 21. And this is crucial in terms of being an affront to the right-wing media. Though I didn't care a damn about what the law said, that wasn't going to stop me. And these points of view are also reinforced by other characters in the novel, like Robin, who is Ewan's second partner, who he moves in with just after shortly moving to London. He says, there's no law about it, and if you want a great big cock-up you, then go out and find one. There's no shortage as far as I can see. And Ewan says, that's good advice. So reading Milkman today, Andrew Haigh, who is the director and writer of the wonderful film All of Us Strangers, recently said in an interview that a generation of queer people are grieving for the childhood that they never had. And it's interesting republishing The Milkman's on His Way as a young adult novel, but one that was not necessarily intended for young adult readers. So, of course, young adult readers can read it, but it is more of a cultural historical document. It certainly has interest as a cultural historical document. And part of the reason of republishing it is, for me anyway, is that it should have never have been out of publication. It was suppressed. It was effectively banned. But what's interesting from reading some of the archives from the David Rees papers is that even for readers of the time, so for older readers who are reading this book. So this is a letter from a 46-year-old school teacher who tells the story. He writes to David Rees and says he's read his book. He's read it on the 259 bus from Finsbury Park to Tottenham. And upon finishing the book, he is moved to tears. And that is because it struck a chord. It struck so many personal chords. So on so many levels, and I think that is part of what is interesting in terms of this book, is that in reading young adult novels as queer people with the experience of having lived through Section 28, it has a different kind of resonance. And for this reader of David Rees's novel, who also had no access to young adult literature, but for entirely different reasons. There was censorship within the publishing industry at the time, but of a different kind. There was still this desire to reconnect with that teenage self, that younger person who needed that kind of representation, who needed those stories at such a formative moment in their life. And I'm going to close with the words from the very excellent introduction by Paul Baker that features and introduces Llewellyn's new edition of The Milkman's on His Way, in which he imagines an afterlife for Ewan. So The Milkman's on His Way closes with Ewan having gone through a period of where he's come of age, really. And at the end of the book, he's now a kind of young adult, and he's saying he's got the whole of his life ahead of him. And Paul Baker says, for the generation before mine, the 1980s did not fulfill its promise of increased liberation, happiness, and long lives for all. But in his mind, Ewan is one of the luckier ones. He was one of the ones to survive. I imagine a sequel where he joined the campaign against Section 28, where he was there on the balcony cheering on the women who abseiled down into the House of Lords on the 2nd of February 1988. He was in the crowd that gathered outside Parliament in 1994 when the age of consent was lowered to 18, and he helped to organise the Kiss Section 28 party, Kiss Section 28 goodbye party on the 17th of November 2003 at the nightclub GAY, where he danced with Jimmy Somerville from Bonsky Beat. He is happy. So that's all from me on The Milk Was on His Way. I hope you've enjoyed this dip into the history of the book and its archival and historical context. The book is available now from Lighthouse Books, and Lyrid Editions will be publishing more works over the next few years. In May 2025, we are publishing Richard Brophy's genre-defying novel In Transit, so please do look out for that. Thank you very much. I have been DM Withers, and do get in touch if you have any comments or questions or want to discuss anything with me. Many thanks.